Good morning or afternoon, if it's afternoon where you are, and welcome back to another episode of Learn Your Own Rules, the podcast. Please enter a line that attempts amusement and humor here, and then we'll move on. This is a board game podcast all about board games. I am your host, Ryan Krim, and today we're going to be talking about a few board games I've played recently, and then we're going to be reviewing our featured game of the week. Now, so as to not waste your time, just one quick reminder, we don't go in depth into rules here at Learn Your Own Rules, the podcast. I might give a very brief summary of the way a game is played, but if you'd like to know more about the rules of a game before continuing, please check the description of this video or this podcast, where I will place links that give a more in-depth explanation of how a game is played. And with that being said, let's move on to some games I've played recently. First off is Exceed, or to be more precise, the Ken and Ryu decks for Exceed. This is a game published by Level 99 Games and is designed by Brad Dalton. Now, Exceed is one of two, or I guess actually soon to be three, now that Level 99 Games will be localizing Sakura Arms here in the US. So one of soon to be three two-player head-to-head card games that seeks to emulate a fighting game, like Street Fighter, BlazBlue, Guilty Gear, games like that. And as a bit of a disclaimer, I'm a huge fighting game fan. I've been playing Street Fighter since Street Fighter 2. It's one of my favorite genres, and so naturally I was drawn to card games or board games that try to emulate that kind of a game. I haven't gotten to play everything that's out there, but I've played a lot of them, and Exceed is probably one of my favorites. Second, maybe only to BattleCon, and maybe also to Sakura Arms. But sufficient to say, I really like Exceed, even if I don't like it quite as much as BattleCon. This is something I'd like to do a video about sometime in the future, going through different two-player card fighting game type games, because there's quite a few out there, and there's some that utilize boards, there's some that utilize standees, there's some that utilize just cards, and there seems to be new ones coming out all the time. And I often see questions from people asking what is best for specific groups, which ones people will like more. So I feel like it's something that's not discussed very often. It's something I'd like to dive into more. If for no other reason, then it gives me an excuse to play more than I already own. To go back to what I said before, I prefer BattleCon to Exceed for the most part, but I appreciate Exceed in that it's got a much lower barrier of entry than BattleCon does. BattleCon being a perfect information game means that you have a really strong advantage as a more experienced player. And that advantage of being an experienced player comes in Exceed too, but it's far less prevalent as you have a deck of cards you're drawing from, and it's not a perfect knowledge game. So normally if I'm sitting down with somebody to play one of these games for the first time, I'll pull out Exceed instead of pulling out BattleCon, and then after we've gotten a few games of Exceed in, I'll teach them how to play BattleCon. And it really helps so the mechanics for Exceed lead really well into the mechanics for BattleCon. But this isn't a review for BattleCon, so let's get back to Exceed. I got the Ken Ryu decks at a convention I was at early last year, and they've sat on my shelf for over a year now. And I didn't think to pull them out until just this past week when I was looking at them and thought, I haven't played this yet. So we pulled it out and had a great time. The Ken and Ryu decks were so much fun. For one thing, as somebody who's a big Street Fighter fan, the theming was completely on point with these decks. The mechanics flow well. The moves that the cards depict make sense both thematically and mechanically in the way the game functions. The person I taught to play picked the game up quick. The rulebook PDF that's online is fantastic. Far better than the old fold-out rulebook that used to come with the Season 1 and Season 2 versions of Exceed. And altogether, we had a great time. And in fact, the player I taught to play the game actually beat me, which is just kind of goes to show that the game is less deterministic than BattleCon is. In BattleCon, if you're the more experienced player, you're going to win every time, provided you're actually trying. That's just the way the game functions, so long as you know the character you're playing and have at least an idea of the character the other person's playing. Exceed has almost a fog of war element to it because you don't know what's in your opponent's hands, and so you can make rough estimations about what they're going to be doing, but you can't plan for it exactly. So there's a little element of guessing there, which I think some people are going to prefer more than the perfect information game of BattleCon. Exceed also includes a mechanic where if you don't want to play a card to attack or defend, you can always just play a card at the top of your deck and hope to get lucky. And that can be kind of a fun mechanic as well. So a little bit more luck driven, but not really by a bunch. And just a really solid game that I would recommend to anybody. And the best part is I checked the Level 99 store, and you can get the Ryu and Ken decks from their store for $1.50, which is an incredible deal. And I'd recommend anybody interested in this kind of a game to just pick those two decks up for that cheap price and then see how you like it. So again, Exceed by Brad Dalton, published by Level 99 Games. Excellent, definitely check it out. This week, my Kickstarter pledge for Gùgōng Pànjūn came in. I think that's how it's pronounced. This is designed by Andreas Stedding and is published by Game Brewer. I don't want to get into it too much because I feel like this is a game I will want to do a feature review on here in the next few weeks, once I've had a chance to play through all the modules a few times. We pulled it out this week and played through a couple of the modules and had a great time. Gùgōng, I think, is a really strong game, and the modules that we incorporated were quick to pick up, quick to set up, quick to teach. They added somewhat to the overall experience for the game, and I think it worked out very, very well. I'm just really not sure if this is an expansion that's necessary. One of the things I like about module-based expansions is they allow you to pick and choose. They allow you to pick what you want to take and what you don't. And I suppose you have that freedom in any expansion, or realistically any game if you're that kind of hedonistic person that wants to play by your own house rules. But a lot of times module expansions don't really feel like they are necessary. And Gùgōng is one of those situations. There are some games where expansions are, in my opinion, automatic includes. For example, a lot of deck building games really benefit from having expansions simply because it increases your card pool, increases your options, things like that. An often cited example is the expansion to Lords of Waterdeep, Scoundrels of Skullport, because it doesn't necessarily fix anything in the base game, because nothing in the base game is broken, but adds a small mechanic that increases the tension and increases the quality of your decision making considerably. Gùgōng Pànjūn doesn't really do that. In fact, I think Gùgōng stands very well on its own and doesn't really need those modules to make the game really sing. Now, if Gùgōng is one of your favorite games and you are playing it every week with the same group of people, then you might be inclined to pick it up because it will add some more variety to the game. But I don't really see Gùgōng being that kind of a game. I think it's a solid, really strong design. It's a game that I love playing. But it doesn't really strike me as a design that's going to be many people's top 3 or top 5 favorite game of all time. And as such, I don't really see it likely being a game that a group is going to be pulling out to play on a weekly or even bi-weekly basis unless they're pulling from a smaller pool of games. It doesn't strike me as the kind of game that would develop a strong competitive meta following behind it, like Terra Mystica. And so I think for most people, just playing with the base game is probably going to be sufficient. Similar to Teotihuacan, which has a modular expansion that's come out. And the modules are enjoyable and they're fun to play, but I kind of get the same feeling when I'm playing Teotihuacan. You'd really have to have played the game a whole lot to feel like you're really benefiting from additional modules. It doesn't mean that they're bad or that the game itself is bad. It's another solid, strong design that stands well enough on its own. It doesn't necessarily need to have those modules added to it. So we'll be playing more Gùgōng over the next couple weeks, and then I will probably return to it shortly for a feature review where I talk about all of the expansion modules individually. But so far, they've been good. We've enjoyed them. I just don't think for the average group that they're going to necessarily need the expansion to really enjoy the game, unless they're under collecting fever and they have to have everything. That was Gùgōng Pànjūn, designed by Andreas Stedding and the Game Brewer. Excuse me, just Game Brewer. I also got another chance to play Res Arcana this week. This is a game designed by Tom Lehman, and it is published by Sandcastle Games. I have played Res Arcana a few times before, and I enjoy Res Arcana, but it's kind of a strange game. Res Arcana is a drafting if you're playing by the drafting rules, which by all means you probably should, and it's a engine building game. Now what's peculiar about Res Arcana is that most engine builder games play over the course of several rounds. The idea being you need rounds to set up your engine, to optimize it, and then eventually get the payoff from it. This is games like Terraforming Mars, Gizmos, games like that. Res Arcana, on the other hand, is peculiar in the sense that most games, at least for our group, tend to end after 4 or 5 rounds, which really isn't that many actions. And frequently the game ends, and I'm feeling just a little bit dissatisfied because I'd like to have seen more combo potential for my cards play out. Now, part of that is on me for having not played the game enough to be able to properly recognize different engine pieces and what will work together to make something that functions really well. But I feel like the game is designed to end that quickly too. To be fair, you could easily up the number of victory points you need to end the game to make it go longer, And now that I think about that, maybe I should give that a try, but I'm not quite sure how the game would bear the weight of a higher point threshold for end of the game. The main reason for that being you only have the 8 cards in your deck that you can pick from and try to combo with. And that's one of the reasons why I feel drafting is so important for this game, because it allows you some measure of control over what cards are going to be in your deck, and you can try to piece together cards that are going to function well together. Although that being said, I've played the game several times non-drafting, and it's pretty impressive how often you can still create combos that function really well together when you're just given a flat 8 cards. I think that stands as a testament to how strong the design for Res Arcana is, and how good Tom Lehman is at what he does. It's nothing like Terraforming Mars where you're going to get 10 cards at the start of the game, and it's very likely that 6 to 7 of them simply aren't going to be helpful for you. Now, it's not necessarily a fair comparison because there are so many cards in Terraforming Mars, and there are so many options of Terraforming Mars that the game plays over the course of 2.5 to 3 hours as opposed to 30 to 45 minutes like Res Arcana does. And so, as a whole, I think Res Arcana is a little short for my tastes, but I love the concept and I absolutely enjoy playing it. I suppose, in a way, the length of the game being shorter actually plays into the game's favor, because that means that you can easily shuffle up and play again. It's a game about making broken combos, finding powerful cards, and so being able to play it quickly in succession allows you to explore the game more fully, and that really works in the game's favor. In a lot of ways, I think of it as similar to Mage Knight. Mage Knight is the kind of game where you have a hand of cards and you're looking at it during your turn and you're thinking, man, I can't do anything that I want to do. But then as you start piecing cards together and figuring out card combos, you start to realize how much you actually can do with what's available to you. There's a lot of interlinking mechanics that allow you to do more than you might think you could at first glance. And that definitely is to Res Arcana's strength. Res Arcana, it's great, I love it. It's a pretty cheap game, I think, and it's quick. It's a little thinkier than more intro titles, but anybody that's interested in medium weight games, this is a fantastic game, and I'd totally recommend it. And I always look forward to playing it more. And that was Res Arcana, designed by Tom Lehman and published by Sandcastle Games. Our feature game this week is The Others, 7 Sins, designed by Eric Lang and published by Cool Many or Not. This seemed like a very appropriate game to review this week because, it's the week before Halloween. This game has kind of a horror type theme to it, but this is one of my favorite games, and it's got some horror elements to it. The Others, 7 Sins is a miniature skirmish game, and it's one of my favorites. It's not a war type game like Kemet or Innis. It's a one versus all game where one player takes on the role of a cabal of demons inspired by one of the 7 sins and a series of their followers, and they pit them against the rest of the players that are playing a number of characters from Faith, a government organization that's been established for the purpose of combating the manifested demons that have come to Earth. Now, right off the bat, this is a theme that's right up my alley. I like urban fantasy, I like horror, and so the blending of the two is obviously something that's going to appeal to me. I love grotesque monsters and things like that, so the sculpts were, of course, interesting to me as well. And it really helps that the game is quite fantastic from a gameplay perspective. Most importantly, it is perfect from a balance perspective. This is the kind of game that is ideal for a group that meets regularly and wants to play a well-balanced skirmish game. It's the kind of game where when you're playing as the humans, you're constantly feeling like you're being overwhelmed by the enemy and you're barely eking out victories here and there and you're barely crawling toward victory. And at the same time, the Sins player is feeling like all their monsters are getting killed all the time, like they're never going to be able to keep up with the heroes, and that there's no way they're going to be able to stop the heroes from achieving victory. It is perfectly balanced, in my opinion. As long as the Sins player knows what they're doing, and the good guys know what they're doing. This game has almost always, and I can't think of a time where it hasn't, been a neck-to-neck race that's come down to the last few turns to see who wins. And really, I'm not quite sure how Eric Lang pulled that off, because it happens every time you play. There's other games that emulate this. Vast the Crystal Caverns is a game that I've played several times and also has that kind of feeling. Frequently when I play Vast, once somebody wins, everybody else at the table puts their cards down and goes, oh man, I was one turn away from winning also. And when I first started playing the game, I wondered how he managed to pull that off. And then the more I played, the more I saw how characters interfere with one another. That's something that should be obvious from the get-go, but there's so much you have to take in the first few times you play Vast that you often miss that that's the case. And so the more you play the game, the more you start to recognize how you and your role can slow down another player. And once people become more adept at doing that, it becomes a game where the game kind of balances itself out, where it often becomes a matter of who can get away with not being shut down by another player on this turn. In a way, I guess you could think of it like Munchkin in that sense, but not nearly as bad. I mean, I enjoy Vast well enough. I don't like playing Munchkin because the game, whoever wins Munchkin is whoever happens to be able to fight a monster when everyone's out of cards that can stop them. It doesn't feel like that in Vast, and it definitely doesn't feel like that in the others, and that's why the others stands out so much in my mind. It's a game where you cannot go lightly on the other player or on the other team. The Sins player has to play as hard as they can. They have to be playing their cards as often as they can. They have to be doing everything they can to slow down the Faith players, and the Faith players have to be hitting back just as hard. They have to be optimizing their actions as best they can. They have to be strategizing, coming up with plans in order to beat the Sins player. And again, from a balance perspective, just feels great. And both sides constantly feel like they're losing, which is phenomenal. It's also a game I feel of interesting, difficult choices. Now, I've heard some criticism of the game saying, well, what you're supposed to do is obvious, but I don't think that's necessarily true. One of the game's biggest strengths is the scenario system. A lot of games have a scenario system, but they often have a backup scenario of either complete this objective or just kill your opponent's entire team. In the others, the good players can only win by achieving the last objective in the scenario, and the Sins player wins by just killing off all the Faith players. Usually, with the way the game progresses, the Sins are going to get stronger as the game goes on. So oftentimes, the Sins player just wants to kind of stall and try to weaken the player slowly until they can't actually win anymore. But at the same time, the Faith players don't start off overly strong, but also gear up and also get stronger as the game goes on. And so there's this constant back and forth tug of war as the Faith players try to complete their objective, and the Sins players just trying to get in their way. The scenario system fits into this very nicely because even though the Faith players have a objective that they're trying to accomplish, they also have to be aware of what's happening on the board. They have to be aware of not just their current objective, but where they're going to need to be 3 or 4 turns from now. They have to be clearing out monsters in the street to allow other characters to get through. They have to be paying attention to where the Sins player is stocking up tokens like fire or disease tokens and try to clear those out before they try to progress into certain areas of the map. The Sins player, on the other hand, knows exactly what the objectives are, and it can hear what the players are strategizing, so it can work to try to head them off in certain directions, or it can try to clog up areas that are going to be high interest for the heroes. Areas where they can equip weapons, or things like that. And so I really don't see the criticism of the choices being obvious. Sometimes they might be. Sometimes it's obvious that, yeah, there's a monster in the street, so we need to have a shooter kill the monster so our fixer can get through. But I don't think that's true inherently for the majority of the game, especially as you're trying to strategize the best way to accomplish each scenario. And as a bonus, I think all the scenarios, if I remember correctly, have a branching option at one point in the scenario's progress, where the Faith players can choose which branch they want to do. And so they can try to bluff one and keep the Sins player thinking they're going to be doing one thing and then try to go for the other. And that doesn't always work, but it's something that's often there as an option. Another thing that works in the other's favor is it's a easy to teach game. The basic hero actions are very simple. Shoot and move and shoot. And if you're not shooting, you can try to clear out one of the bad tokens, one of the fire or plague tokens. That's essentially all you need to teach to a new player from the get-go. There are some smaller rules too, activating city spaces, things like that. And there's a couple of nuanced rules that a lot of players tend to forget about, but they're things you can easily teach along the way, provided the Sins player and at least a couple players on the main team know what they are. I'm not necessarily advocating that you teach a game this way. I'm more a fan of teaching everything from the outset and then starting a game. But a lot of people, especially for a game like this, want to just start going. They want to start rolling dice. They want to start fighting monsters. And so it seems like for the other 7 Sins and games like it, that a lot of players want to just get going and learn as they play. And this is a game that greatly facilitates that kind of teaching style. One of the things that helps that is there aren't a ton of fiddly rules in this game. There are some small rules that often get overlooked. The most notable one I could think of is that enemy monsters cannot move out of spaces with heroes, but heroes can move out of spaces with monsters. And this is a very important rule because it allows the good players to lock down an area with one of their tank characters so that other characters can move in and fight, or shoot from a distance, or to blow it up from space, and things like that. So, easy to teach. Playing this in is obviously the most complicated part. Normally, in a one versus all game, you want to have the most experienced player play that role. And I think that's fitting for a couple of reasons. I said before, this is a game that's perfectly balanced, great tension, and that's true. Naturally, though, that manifests itself more if everybody at the table is somewhat balanced in their experience. If the Sins player is way more experienced than all or most of the Faith players, then the Sins player is probably going to win. And I could see that being a comfort for some people because it's not based solely on just rolling dice, and there's a lot of deterministic values to this game. But going back to what I was talking about is that having the most experienced player play the Sin allows them to kind of adjust the game experience to the game group. I've had games where I play with brand new players where playing as a Sin, I really lied on them, allowed them to take objectives easier than they normally could, just to ensure everybody at the table was having a good time. And the game works for that, and I approve that kind of a mindset going into a game because the more a group will enjoy a game, the more they'll want to come back to it, and you can build up to that level of, okay, we've got these great matches between two groups that come down to the last die roll. As far as weaknesses go, there's really only one main weakness, and that is that the game is a one versus all game. That might not be a problem for some groups, but I've been in many situations where you want to play a game like this, and you look around and say, okay, who wants to be the overlord? And everybody just kind of stares at each other because nobody wants to take the bait. Some groups have the player that loves playing the DM or playing the overlord, and that's great. And in those cases, there really aren't many other downsides to playing this game. But I can definitely see groups having that issue, and in some of the groups that I play with, we do run into that issue from time to time. Another potential issue is that there are a ton of expansions for the other seven sins. I have a Kickstarter bundle that I purchased on the secondary market, so I've got everything. So variability isn't wonderful with the base box. You start with two sins and then a set of, I think, 8 heroes that you can pick from. Once you start adding expansion sets in, naturally your variability goes up a bunch. At the end of the day, if you have even the apocalypse set, I think there's 7 or 9 scenarios. I can't remember, which doesn't sound like a ton, but considering you have the 7 different sins you can play, each with their own special abilities, and if you consider that the acolytes that you pick, they're like your little minions that are the weakest monsters, but they have their own abilities. Most frequently, they dictate when those minions can come into play. Those change up the way a game plays considerably. And so once you've got an expansion or two, the variability is fantastic in this game. Downside is you kind of have to get a couple of expansions to get to that point. And this is a game that I think benefits from having all those expansions. This is a game that I think benefits from variability, and I think it's a game that, if it's a game your group is playing a lot, it's a game that you're probably going to want to explore quite a bit. And it's a game that rewards you quite a bit for exploring as well. Every expansion, except for the individual sins boxes, all the player team expansion boxes also come with new equipment cards, which are always great to get. I think they might always also include a new member of the Hellfire Club, which is a special type of baddie that can come out and has special abilities, new toys for the Sins player to play. So again, a potential weakness. I think that they add greatly to the game, but I could see somebody hesitating to pick it up because you kind of want to have those. Lastly, I could see people not wanting to play this game because it is a dice rolling game, and really there's no way around that. In my opinion, there's room in everybody's collection for a couple games like this, though. Games that you can just have a great time rolling dice, killing monsters, and not taking the game overly seriously, unless you're just a very competitive group. Even in our tensest games, we were having a great time laughing, taunting each other, things like that. And this game works great for that. This game also has the dice bursting mechanic. I don't know when that first showed up, but I think the earliest, most predominant feature in most players' minds is probably something like Chaos in the Old World. I know some people love bursting dice, some people don't. I personally think it's a fun mechanic, and it's utilized here as well. And I think a lot of people could appreciate that also. I wouldn't honestly, if you are on the fence because of dice rolling, I wouldn't let that turn you off to this. As I said before, skill is a much bigger deal in the others than just dice rolling. And it helps that the dice are pretty forgiving in the other seven sins. The burst symbol is also a wild symbol. So not only lets you pick the die face you end up on, and it lets you roll more dice. Lastly, I've heard some criticism about the dogpiling strategy. This is a strategy that Sins players like to take on where they will put a whole bunch of monsters into one room, a key area where the Faith players want to be. And once a Faith player moves in, they have to either attack the Sins player or the Sins player is going to react and they're going to attack the Faith player. And oftentimes this is going to end up in the Faith player dying because when you have so many monsters in a room, the Sins player's rolling sometimes like 14, 15, 16, even more dice. I think people that criticize this strategy are being a little short-sighted for a couple of reasons. First off, this isn't actually a very effective strategy. It seems like it would be because you can guarantee a kill on a hero. But off the top of my head, I can't think of a scenario where that's actually truly beneficial to the Sins player. Usually, the objectives on a scenario track say things like kill a certain number of monsters, cleanse a certain number of icons off an area, or of course, kill the big baddie for the Sins player, the avatar. It's really hard, if not impossible, for a Sins player to dogpile enough monsters on enough different objectives for the cleanse so many tokens objective to sufficiently slow down the heroes and stop them from completing their objective. For the dogpiling strategy to work, you have to put everybody, almost all of your monsters into one space. And if you're going to be doing that, well, the Faith players are just going to go somewhere else and complete their objective elsewhere. Likewise, when there's an objective to kill something like the Avatar, sure, you can pile all the monsters you want in the room with the big bad guy, with the big Avatar creature, but the Faith players get to choose who they're damaging when they roll attack dice. So all they have to do is move a character in, roll enough dice to kill that one character, and they're home free. Now, I don't want to pretend I've played the game so often and so much that there's no way there's any combination that couldn't make a strategy like this really powerful. There might be, but after as many games as I've played, I've never seen it come up as a big issue. And every time I've seen a player try that, there's always been a way of circumventing and still succeeding as the Faith players. The last thing I want to talk about is the really interesting reaction mechanic that the Sins player has. Normally in a game, a one versus all game, you go back and forth on turns. The good guys take a turn or a couple turns, and then the bad guy will take a turn. And the good guys will take another couple turns, and the bad guy will take a turn. Or you'll go around. In Fury of Dracula, Dracula takes a turn, then each good guy takes a turn. In the others, it doesn't work like that at all. In the others, players take their turns, and after any player's turn, the Sins player can choose to activate a reaction token. They start with so many, and they can gain additional ones as the game goes on. And so when the Sins player goes is dictated on when they can capitalize on a perceived weakness in the other team. And that makes for fantastic situations where the Sins player has to be paying really close attention to what's going on, and every time the Faith team takes an action, they're just sitting there wondering, what are they going to do? Are they going to play a card? Are they going to attack? Are they going to react to what we're doing? It adds so much to the tension of the game. It makes for a very interesting turn structure that I haven't seen in a game like this before, and overall improves the experience vastly. And I don't know if I really have anything else to say about the other Seven Sins. It's a great design. I love playing it. I've heard it compared to Cthulhu Death May Die. Haven't had a chance to play that yet. Its biggest weakness, its biggest flaw is that it's a one versus all game, and I can see that being a bust with some groups. I wish there was a way to play this strictly co-op, kind of like playing Descent with the app, but I don't see how that could be possible. The reaction system for the Sins player is so dynamic and so interesting and so excellently executed that I don't even know if you could functionally make a co-op version run by an app work. No, you could, but I don't know if it'd be as satisfying. But yeah, that was the other Seven Sins, one of my top games, the review for the week, and it is designed by Eric Lang and published by Cool Mini or Not. Well, that's it for me here today on Learn Your Own Rules, the podcast. It is getting chilly outside, so I hope you remember to dress warmly, but more importantly, just stay in your warm home and play some games this weekend. My name is Ryan Krim. You can reach me at learnyourownrules@gmail.com, or you can tweet me at LYORules. Have a great weekend, and as we say here, game on. Thank you for listening to the Learn Your Own Rules podcast. This podcast is created, produced, directed, and edited by Ryan Krim. Please send help.